How's it rolling there, neighbors? Ian with eTrailer here. Today we're going to be looking at the Hydrastar Brake Line Kit, and this will be put on our 2023 East to West Ahara. Let's get into a couple features of that and then the install. This particular kit layout is going to be for tandem axles. There are going to be different options depending on the number of axles you have, but this one is specifically for those tandems. You're going to come with a 25-foot long section here. This is going to go from your actuator back to your axles. You're going to have two of the shorter sections of preform line, and that's going to go from each split that comes with the kit back to the brake behind the front axle there. And then you've got one line here that is going to be intended to go from one side of the trailer to the other. So the easiest way to tell the difference between those is you're going to have two sections that only will have two loops at the top. You'll see 1 and 2, and then your long section is going to have the 1, 2, and 3 before we get that uncoiled. You also will have all of these soft lines that are going to go directly to your brake calipers. Before we put all of these onto the camper, I did want to talk about unbending and bending our any shape you might need to have these fit. It is a soft copper, and you're just going to want to very slowly just pick an edge. So I'm going to come to one end, and if I want to have this just straightened out, I'm only going to do about a 6 to 8 inch piece at a time. And we'll work the whole way down it until we've got that straight. The biggest thing we don't want to do is just start pulling right away on the whole thing, because you may kink one of these, and if you kink it, guess what? You're buying another one. So we're going to go nice and slow with all of our bends, just straightening that out. And it'd be the same situation if we're going to be bending maybe in an S shape or something like that. We're just going to do nice steady bends going little by little, so that way you're not going to put any kinks or end up putting any holes in the lines. Another great feature of these kits is it's already going to have the flange at the end pre-formed. There's not going to be any cutting that we have to do with these lines. Everything's just going to go directly into either one of the fittings that come with the kit or directly into the caliper in the case of the soft lines. Wouldn't say the install's too bad on this one. It is very time consuming and very tedious. And you just have to really be careful with those lines, and like we had talked about, we want to avoid kinking them, because then you're going to end up with another set of lines coming in a new order. So to be able to secure those lines, we're going to be using the smaller eyelets for our hard lines, and then if we need to, these bigger eyelets for the soft lines. So we'll go ahead and I'll walk you through that entire process of getting this ran and set up. If it's not something after you watch the video that you feel like you need to tackle, go ahead and look at our dealer locator. They're going to find you a trained professional that can get all of this installed for you. But for all those DIYers, let's go ahead and hop into that install and get this squared away. And we're going to begin at the actuator. I've already got everything ran simply because every single RV is going to have a little different setup on the bottom depending on what types of lifts you have, or plumbing routing, things of that are going to change how you're going to need to route these on the bottom. So this is more of just a generalization of where the lines are going to go. But we're starting at our actuator. I've got pre-drilled holes that were already in the bottom of the camper. So we ran that through, making sure it's not rubbing or touching anything on that from the actuator down through the floor. From the floor, we came along these factory hold downs that were just self-tappers holding up this bottom panel. And we did the same thing coming down the side of the vehicle here. Then we did have to step up to the upper level. There's two sections of the floor for this particular camper. So there's one set of bends here just to get us all the way back to the axles. And as I had mentioned when we were talking about this earlier, these are preformed in, so we did have to put one great big loop in to be able to get to our first splitter block here. And from that, we've got our line going across to the other set of brakes, and then also this right front brake here. And then there is a another line that will go back to the rear brake on the right side, and that is just hooked up with that coupler that we had talked about earlier. And then we've got that ran across to our three-way fitting here, and going from that to the left front brake, and then that final line going over to our left rear brake. Now, I did want to mention they only give you enough to be able to go from one side of the vehicle to the other, like we had talked about with those 3 sets of smaller lines. So you will only be able to reach to that. So best thing to do is going to be mock all of this up without securing anything, and then once you've got it all laid out in place, that's going to let you see that you're going to be able to have all your connections and fittings without anything touching. Now let's take a look at one of the brake lines to see how those fit in. It's just going to go into either your adapter that's going to take it from our hard line straight to the soft line like we've got with the rear brakes, or in this case we're looking at that left front brake and how that's hooked up. But it's all the same either way, regardless of which wheel end you're on. We'll have that hooked to our feed source, and then that just routes straight down and is attached directly to the fitting on our brake caliper. The last thing we want to do once we've got it all routed is go through each fitting. They are 3/8 fittings, and I would suggest using a line wrench on those because it'll keep you from accidentally rounding out the edges of that fitting there, and snug that down until you feel good resistance. Now, as we go to bleed the actuator, you may find that you'd have a leak, and that's no big deal. We can just tighten that back up. We're just going to go pretty snug right now. Now, one thing I wanted to mention about this particular block, and you may have to do it on the other one as well to be able to tighten up all the fittings on it. If you place a good amount of washers in between the bracket and the bottom of your frame, that's going to help you be able to access all of the fittings here. So we'll just get each of those tightened up, and we're just going to work our way back through the system until we get to that very last brake and get everything tightened up. The soft brake lines are going to be a little trickier. We're going to take our 3/8 line wrench, get that on first, then use a 14mm to hold the main body of that and get that tightened up here. And you'll just kind of work it nice and slow till we've got that tightened down, making sure to hold on to that back shank. These little adapters that go from the hard line to the soft brake line, you can hold that center part with a box end wrench. It's just a 13mm, and then be able to tighten up those fittings there pretty quickly. Last but not least here, before we do our bleed, we're just going to go ahead and tighten down the 3/8 fitting on the back of our brake caliper. Now we'll need to add our fluid to the pump here, so we'll just remove the cap, and we're going to open up a new bottle of brake fluid. You can use either DOT 3 or 4, depending on what you prefer. It will accept either. We're going to go with 3 on this particular fill, so I'm just going to get that poured into the reservoir here. What you can do is use a Gatorade bottle or something along the lines and a piece of rubber hose, and we're going to put that there on top of the bleed port on the pump to start. Then you can use a 7/16 wrench to break that loose, so I'm going to get that in a good position. Get our rubber hose put on top of that, and then we're going to actuate the brakes. We've got the valve open, and we'll apply that. You'll see the fluid going through the tube. Just run that for a second and close it back up. And what we're looking for is, you're going to see in the hose right now we've got no bubbles, so when we actuate the brakes we shouldn't have any bubbles coming out. We should have a nice clear line, and once we've got that, we can start moving our way down the system. Now we're going to come to the furthest brake away from the actuator. We're going to put on our little rubber tube on one of the bleeders, take a 5/16 wrench, And we're gonna need somebody at the front of the vehicle either running the towable, or in our case we're using just a portable controller box that we can hook up to. So I'm gonna have Jesse up front helping us, and he's gonna go ahead and as soon as I tell him open, he's gonna go ahead and turn the pump on. So I'm gonna go open, all right, and closed, and he'll shut that off. Okay, and we're gonna repeat the same process on the bottom bleeder. All right, open, and closed. Okay. And now we've got good clear fluid coming back to this back brake. We're gonna keep moving our way forward, just going through the system. So we're gonna go to that front left now, since that's gonna be our next closest, and hop over to the other side, do the right rear, and then that right front. And that's gonna do for our look at and installation of the Hydrastar Brake Line Kit on our 2023 East to West Ahara. My name's Ian with eTrailer. Appreciate you watching.